Welcome, and in this lesson, we're going to take a look at setting the GID, or something called SGID for set GID, on a directory. Now, the reason we might want to do this is because if you set it on a directory, then that means when files are created within that directory, those new files will inherit the group ownership of that parent directory. So let me take you back, if you recall our past few lessons when we worked with groups. When a user created a file, the group owner of that file was that of the current group the user was logged into. If we weren't using the new group command, it was the user's primary group. But what happens when there's a user who has multiple groups they belong to, and there's multiple directories for those groups, and that user creates a file inside of one group directory? Well, generally speaking, you're going to want those files, depending on the situation, to have permissions of that of the parent directory, or else other members of that group who are supposed to be able to view the files in the directory can't do so. Let's demonstrate this. It's going to be a lot easier to understand as we get started. So first, I'm going to navigate into my home directory, and I'm going to perform a make dir on the groups command. We're just going to say we have an arbitrary location where we store our group directories. So we're going to do make dir groups. I'm going to go inside of groups, and we're going to do a make dir, and I'm going to say Galactica and Colonial 1. Those are our group names. Now, in order to demonstrate this, we need to make sure those groups exist on our system. So we'll do a group add. We're going to add Galactica, and then we'll do a group add Colonial 1. We also need to make sure that the owner permissions for each group directory matches that of the actual group. So we'll do a chown, and we're going to set the group ownership of Colonial 1 to, again, Colonial 1. So we're going to set the group ownership on Colonial 1 to Colonial 1. Then we'll also do the same for Galactica, and then on the directory Galactica. So what's happening here, we have this colon, right? So if we don't put anything in front of the colon, that means we're not going to change the owner of the file. When we're doing colon, then the name, that's going to change the group owner, not the user owner, the group owner. And we'll go ahead and hit enter. If we do an ls-al, we can see the long listing. Now, we don't have to use the A. The A just shows hidden files as well. I always do AL as a habit, but L is all you need to show the long listing, which shows the permissions. So if you notice here, our Colonial 1 is group ownership Colonial 1. Our Galactica is group ownership Galactica. Now, let's demonstrate this. Let's create a new user, and I'm going to call that user Viper. Let's set a password for the user Viper. That way we can log in on a separate terminal to our Red Hat machine in order to test this. Now, if we take a look at Viper, right, we can either use the groups command or the ID command. We see that Viper has the primary group as Viper, which is the same name as the user, because it does that by default. And then it doesn't have any supplementary groups. So let's go ahead and add Viper to two supplementary groups. So we're going to do that by doing a user mod -A, or A flag, or A option. Remember, A is going to append a supplementary group onto your current group. So if we don't do an A, it'll just replace your current supplementary group. So we'll do A and a capital G, the group we want to add the user to. And so in this case, we'll call it Colonial 1, and then the user, which will be Viper. And then again, we'll do it again for A capital G on Galactica for the user Viper. So if we now do ID Viper, or even groups Viper again, it shows the user belongs to multiple groups. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a different tab, and I'm going to connect to my linuxacademy.com lab server as the Viper user so we can demonstrate this. And make sure that we have set a password for the Viper user, and we have, so we can log in. So now that I'm in there, I'm going to go into my home groups directory. Now, let's take a look at our permissions first. So inside of our groups directory, we see that group ownership, if you're a member of the group, you can read and execute inside of the directory, but you can't write files. So we're going to go ahead and set change mod, and we're going to do group plus write on Colonial 1, and then same thing, but for Galactica. And now if we do an ls-al, we'll see that we also have write privileges. So we were using the symbolic link to create those privileges. I could have used the numeric notation, which would have just put, if we kept the same permissions over here and the same permissions for everyone else, it would have been 771. So now that we're logged in, let's go ahead and go into our Galactica directory. And I'm going to go ahead and do a touch file 1. If we do an ls-al, and again, we only have to do the L. The A is for showing all files, the L is for the long listing. What happens is we see the new file was created with the user's primary group or current logged in group, unless we use the new group command, as the group owner. Well, that creates a problem for other users that are using or belong to the Galactica group and are using this directory for storing member files for Galactica, which means nobody inside of the Galactica group would actually have permissions to view this file. So this is something we need to consider when it comes to diagnosing file permission issues. So what do we need to do in order for other members of the Galactica group in order to be able to view this file? Now, granted, they can view the file now. That's because the world permissions over here have read. But if we want them to be able to write to the file, the group owner needs to be Galactica. So how would we set that? So without changing the user's primary group, whenever the user creates a file within a specified directory, that file inherits the parent directory's ownership permissions. So all we'll do is change mod for the group. We're going to add the set GID permission, special permission bit. We're going to do that on the Galactica directory. So now if we come over to Viper and we do a touch file 2 and we take a look here, we see that the second file created automatically inherited the group ownership permissions of the parent file, which would be Galactica, instead of creating it with the user's primary or current logged in group ID. So that way we don't have to go back and forth and modify permissions whenever somebody creates a new file and forgets to log into a group when they do it. We're basically saying if you create a file in this directory, it's going to inherit the parent directory's permissions. Now we did this as a group example, but again, this could apply anywhere. We could just say if it is created in this directory, inherit the permissions of the parent directory. And that's what the set GID does. So to demonstrate that one more time, if we go into Colonial 1 and we do a touch file 1 and we take a look at our directory here, it creates it with the owner Viper. That's because for Viper, the primary group or the current logged in group is Viper. We could use the new group command and a dash to change into a specific group if we wanted, but that's too much to ask for the user. Instead, if we want all the files created by anybody in that specific directory to have the ownership of the parent directory, we would just add the set GID on the group, right? So we have group. This is the representation for the set GID. And then we'll do Colonial 1. So now if we come over here and do a touch file 2 inside of the Colonial 1 directory, you'll notice that our new file now has the permissions of Colonial 1. So that concludes it for this lesson. Go ahead and complete this lesson.